We won't be able to get to practice certain skills. However, at the same time, as Brian's mentioned about his LinkedIn tip the other night, if you get at least one actionable takeaway or something that you want to explore further, then I hope that that has satisfied you for this. The other day, somebody sent me a link to an article or a post, and there was a nice quote in this article, and I thought, just give me a second now till I get on this. I thought that I would share this quote with you because it does provide a certain frame around the whole idea of being effective and performing at your best, and particularly when it comes to things like conversations, which we all have, and they can be the making or breaking of many things in our lives, not just in the professional space. But the thing here, according to Lao Tzu, this famous Chinese philosopher and master, mastering yourself is true power. So that sets a bit of a frame around this here in terms of whatever you want to do and however you want to improve your conversations, self-mastery is quite an essential part of any performances in our lives. So as Brian mentioned, I work largely with do work around talent and potential in organizations, and I've done a lot of work with individuals and teams who want to be more productive and effective so they can perform at their best. So I'm going to draw on some of that work. I'll be using a few models as well. I'm not a huge fan of theories, but models tend to be quite useful because they help us understand things, break things down into chunks that we can understand, and we can see how processes and things work. So conversations are quite essential to being more productive and effective in the workplace. So I'd like to use this opportunity to also share some of the experiences I've had working with individuals and teams. I sent Brian a few topics, and this was the one he thought would work best, given the overall theme of the week for the PMI. So I'll give you an outline of what we're going to do in a minute. Before we do that, I just wanted to get you involved. So I'm going to, those of you who don't know Menti, if you can key in menti.com into your phone, you go into your browser and just key in menti.com into your phone. And I will give you, in a second, I will give you a code that you need to put in. Those of you who know Menti, it's going to be short and painless. Experience this. The great thing about Menti is it's anonymous and it's voluntary. So if you don't want to participate, that's fine. But what I'm going to do, I'm just going to get to see if I can get to this my Safari here. Just one second. Can you see my Menti, Brian? Yeah. Okay. So if you go to menti.com and key in the code 9814825, and basically the question is, what's your biggest communication challenge as a project manager? So I'm starting at a kind of high level, general level here, because conversations are a key part of communications. So if you could just, you can have up to 3 options. So if you can perhaps go there, log in, and put in your thoughts.
Can you repeat the code?
It's at the top of the screen, 9814825. Can everybody see the code? Can you see it, Brian?
Menti.com.
We can see it. I shared it in the chat as well. Just making sure.
Thanks for that. Yeah. So this is creating a word cloud, basically. And once again, afterwards, we will share this with you. We can put it out there, Brian, through the channels, right? So share it. So cultural differences, time zones. Language. Okay.
Is that menti.com?
Yes.
Menting.com. Oh. Nine votes.
Okay, I'm going to close the poll now. But as you can see, the stronger and more popular words, like it's a word cloud, so they come out quite strong on the screen. Okay, I'm going to close the vote now. And okay, so some of the things here I will probably be addressing over the next 40 minutes or so. The language thing is a bit more challenging, I think, because that can, yeah, I've experience of that. Being understood, cultural differences, okay, and all sorts of verbal, non-verbal, giving feedback, dealing with conflict, okay. So I'm going to go back now to the to my presentation. Can you see my presentation? Brian, can you confirm? Hello, Brian, there? Can anybody open their mic and confirm they can see my presentation? It's just, okay,
Sorry,
good, thanks. Yes.
I was giving you the thumbs up.
Yeah, I can see
I
it.
can't see you. You
it.
can't see it. Okay,
Communication breakdown.
so we just did the Mentimeter. So here's an overview of what I'm going to do. I've kept it simple. I'm going to actually talk a little bit about these challenges now from my own experience, and I think you'll identify with many of the things. And then I'm going to go on to what we call the big idea. You know, presentations have been got shorter, and one of the tips has always been if you can distill it down to something like a key takeaway for people. So it's often called the big idea. And then at the end, if you're interested, we'll do next steps, and that'll include a Q&A. If you've got questions, please write them down. I'd rather keep a flow to this and then have you interact at the end with me on what I talk about. Somebody has their microphone opened and it's creating background noise. Could I ask that person to check? Or Brian, can you mute? Yeah, okay, thanks for that. So typically what will happen for me, I'm going to talk from my experience here, is I'll get approached by often it's not the team leader, it's often somebody working in the team, and they'll say, we want to do some team building, and we heard about you, and perhaps you can come and help us. So the first question I ask them is basically, why don't you just go go-karting or bowling or paintballing or an adventure park? Just go and have a nice lunch and go out and have a bit of fun. And they say, oh no, but there's there's a few things going on in the team, and because they don't really need me to go out and have a bit of fun together as a team. So there's always, I want to find out what's going on underneath. And one of the things I insist upon is talking and having a proper conversation with the team leader, whether it's a manager or a director of that team, because that's where I'm going to start to begin to get a sense of what's happening in that team. Now, usually what happens is the director or manager wants to tell me all about the problems in the team, and that's fine. I'm listening quite well for that. I'm also listening to how they describe the team. So it kind of goes a bit like this. This is the kind of thing the briefing entails is, well, I've got this team. Often it's somebody who's got a new team, and it'll go something like, well, I've got some high performers and low performers in this team, and some people in the middle, and I've got a few difficult people, the difficult people. And as one guy said to me in Luxembourg a few years back, he said, quite frankly, he said, I've got about 3 or 4 people in this team. There's about 25 people on the team. He says, about 3 or 4 people on this team are a waste of space. That was the language he used. Now, when I hear that, I get excited, because this is somebody applying a sort of a linear convention to a team. And one of the things that's really important to a team is the team dynamics. And that's a systemic thing. And one of the things I tend to do before I take the assignment is I will insist on the team leader participating fully in any team day or team half day, whatever it is we do, because they are part of the team dynamic. And often what we hear is just one side of the story. And often what I discover is that the story is not the story that I've been told, which is quite fascinating. And I ask them to be a full participant, because sometimes they say to me, you run the team day and I'll just sit and watch how my team interacts and performs. And I say, no, you won't, because you're part of the team. So we try and get those things sorted. I had this example, the guy who told me that 3 members of his team were a waste of space. We did this exercise. He wanted to do a whole bunch of stuff and he hadn't got a lot of time. We did this exercise where essentially we had everybody have a conversation. I gave them a frame around the conversation. It was designed to pull out a couple of key skills. And everybody was sitting in a circle, and he just happened to team up with this one lady. And at the end, after the conversation she had with him, he had with her, I asked for the usual feedback from the room about what was going on. And it's not usual that the director puts his hand up first, but he put his hand up and he said to me, he said, that was an amazing exercise. He said, I can't believe I've never understood this person. I've never understood this person. I could never have imagined the way, what motivates them and how they operate. It's totally different from me, you know? And this turned out this lady was one of his 3 wastes of space, right? And that day, that conversation took place in the morning. That day, she showed what a brilliant team player she was. She showed him what she was capable of, because we did some simulations. And afterwards, having a beer, he said to me, I'm amazed I got it so wrong, he said. I got in my own way. So this can be the power of the conversation if you know how to have those conversations. I walked away feeling very grateful to him, and I also felt that he probably moved the dial quite a bit with that team from that just one experience of changing his perception of this person. So these are things that get in the way, you see. Perception and unconscious bias. Some of you mentioned that in the word cloud. We filter the world, we come in there, and these things manifest themselves in generalizations about, she's a typical Italian, he's a typical Japanese guy, or he's a typical German or whatever. And a lot of these perceptions color our ability to have the conversations with people that we need to have and to communicate and get on effectively with those people. And it leads to things like people being misunderstood. Understanding came up in the word cloud as well. So we get people who feel understood and people who feel misunderstood. And if you've ever had the experience of feeling misunderstood and not heard, it's not a very comfortable place. So what else do we see? Negative anchors get sown in a team because basically, that behavior that sets everybody off in the room, where that person likes to get up on their hobby horse, and the whole room then gets caught out by this. This is like an anchor. It's a trigger that sets everybody off. And what does that lead to? So we end up with lack of alignment. Now, we've all seen in the sports world a team where on paper they look brilliant, and actually, when they turn, it's a bit like a team turning up. A lack of alignment is a bit like a team turning up to a soccer pitch, like a football pitch. And some of them are dressed to play soccer. Some of them have a rugby ball. Some of them have a volleyball, a basketball, and some have a tennis racket. They're all there to play ball, but they're all playing a different ball game. They're all coming at it from a totally different perspective. And when you have that in a team, you've got quite a lot of madness and chaos. And the interesting thing then is we've got this remote working going on. Now, some of you have been dealing with your teams remotely for years, so it's not that new. And this is also having an impact on how well a team is able to have conversations, because as you probably know, one side effect of doing a lot of work over these platforms is that often only one person can talk at a time. So that can work very well for politeness, but it can also work against you if people don't get a chance to actually speak up and be heard on those problems. And the most common thing that is a result of poor conversational skills is this guy here. Oops, let me click again. The elephants. The elephants are in the room and they're all sitting under the tree waiting to appear. And everybody knows they're there and nobody names them. And that's fine because many teams get on very well and the elephants are still in the room. But it's when the going gets tough and the elephants start dancing that all the problems start in the team. So as we get towards the end of this, I will be giving you some tips on how to deal with these elephants in the room. Okay, so that's the challenges, some of the challenges that I come across regularly when I'm working with individuals and teams. And the great thing is that by actually working through this stuff, we can actually make progress. And I'll explain this now as we go to, so what's the big idea behind this? So this may surprise you or it may not surprise you, I don't know, but it's based on my experience and the experience of colleagues. So your ability to have meaningful conversations that make a difference will come down to 3 essential ingredients. And the first one is awareness. You actually need to know where you're starting from. You can't go somewhere, and whether it's an improvement or even when you start a new project, you can't go there unless you're aware of where you're starting from. And actually, this entire talk is going to be about building awareness. So I'm only going to spend a few minutes on each of these 3 factors. But awareness is absolutely crucial to your ability to have meaningful conversations with your teams and your people. So if we go to the next, so when you're working as a leader or a project manager, of course you're paid by your organization, whether you work directly or you're paid as a consultant. The end game is you've got to deliver results. And in classic management and leadership thinking, there are 2 dimensions to how we get there. One is our relationship focus, and the other one is our task focus. So we got to get stuff done, but we got to get stuff done through people. Now, the challenge with all of this is that the brain uses, despite the way the image looks here, the brain uses 2 completely different networks to do relationship versus doing task. So relationship is often about, can I be nice and get on with my colleagues? And task is about, we need to follow the rules. We need to deliver this on time, on budget. You know, we can't afford any slippage. So you're constantly juggling between these 2 preferences. And what you'll discover is that you will have a natural preference for one of these. So the question I would ask is, what is your preference when you think about how you go about projects? Where's your starting point? Are you basically somebody who goes, the stuff has to get done, I don't care about all this, you know, mamby-pamby stuff, because, you know, yeah, everybody has stuff in their lives, but I'm here to get this project done and I'm rewarded? Or are you really the people person who like wants everybody to be happy all the time? And the consequences of both of these are often not being able to deliver results because they create a sort of paradoxical relationship between each other. So what will happen is, if you have a strong preference for the other, and your brain will probably naturally do that, it's not so easy to toggle between the 2. And so you can feel a bit out of balance at times. And the goal usually is to achieve the versatility that a concert pianist has. So you need both hands to play the music. You need all fingers working. So the question is, how versatile are you at navigating the task and relationship space? Because they'll require slightly different emphasis in your conversations, because that's just the way it is. A task-based conversation will be different from a relationship-based conversation. And based on your perception of your versatility, what impact is that having on the types of conversations you're able to have with people? So we'll look at a few conversation types later, but have a think about that. Is there a particular conversation you find quite easy to have versus a type of conversation that tends to stretch you quite a bit? So before I move on to the next part of the essential ingredients, I'm going to ask to get your input yet again. So now I'm going to activate another Mentimeter. And this time, what we're going to do is I've got 7 statements. They're based on real research. And what you've got to do with the statements is you've got to basically move the slider. So I'll show it to you in a second. And it goes from totally agree to totally disagree. So it's just a question of moving the slider for each one. The colors don't mean anything. It's just the way that Menti sorts them. But you just move the slider and we'll see what the collective views are. And I'd ask you to be honest with this one because it's anonymous. So you can afford to be honest with this one. Let me go to Safari. Can you see it, Brian? Safari or not? No, you should be able to see
The
Safari.
is open for voting.
Okay. I need to open voting. Okay, so how are things in your organization? And you use the slider basically, and you strongly disagree or strongly agree. And let's see what sort of for each of these statements.
The question is not open for voting.
Sorry?
The question is not open for voting.
It is now.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and you have the code again at the top. I'll check that it's working on my phone.
It's working fine. I'm in there. It's working fine now.
Yeah, should be. Okay, so we see some interesting patterns are emerging from this data. Thanks for being honest about it. Okay, I think that's probably got 20. Yeah, there's a few more people coming in. Great. Good. So we're seeing some strong cultural factors playing out here from an organization point of view. Okay, 25 people. I'll cap it at 25. And close the voting on this one. Okay, the voting's closed. I'm going to switch back to my presentation. So I'm going to explain this now to you in the presentation. This comes from some research, but it's a key variable in how we go about conversing. Are you okay, Brian? Yeah. Back to Keynote. Yeah. Yeah. See Keynote again?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
I'm back again. Yeah. Okay. This is my own two-handed effort between the right and left hand here. Menti on my left and Keynote on my right. Okay.
I thought you were
so-
trying to persuade us they're your hands. I don't believe that.
I wish. You know, manicurist, do you? Okay, so the second building block is mindset. Your awareness will include your mindset, but this is about how do we perceive and interpret and filter the world around us. It includes all these things like values and beliefs, attitudes, our experiences, our memories. As a matter of fact, I'm going to go on and biases, but I'm going to go on Frank's what's it called, follow-up thing after this, and explain how an experience I had conditioned something I made a complete cock up of, and it had huge implications for me. So I'm going to do that if you're around for that. Research into mindset. One of the most well-known researchers in this area is a professor called Carol Dweck from Stanford. And she studied a lot of children over longitudinal studies. And she identified that there are often two mindsets at play, and these pervade and persist into adulthood. And one of these is what she calls a fixed mindset. And the other one is called a growth mindset. Now, a fixed mindset tends to be, I kind of have my mindset and I'm happy with it. And the person with a fixed mindset doesn't tend to want to try too many things outside the comfort zone, whereas a growth mindset sees a lot of things as opportunities to learn. And I thought this next quote from Malcolm Gladwell was quite captured the whole thing about mindset. Our mindsets work really well for us until they don't. And often when people clash, it's because my map of the world is not the same as your map of the world, and our two maps bump into each other, and we can't find a way to combine them to find a better way forward. So your responsibility as a person, as a human being, to constantly be updating your positions on as many things as possible. And if you don't contradict yourself on a regular basis, then you're not thinking. Of course, the little phrase that goes with this is hard to say. It's like, I think I got that wrong. And being able to admit that you don't know or got something wrong. So what are some of the main mindset factors that underpin conversations that make a difference? So let's have a look at some of these factors. And as we look at them, think about how prevalent these are in your organization, in your teams. Is there something here that you feel you could do more of to improve the mindset and the atmosphere that exists in your teams? So conversations make a difference. They're inclusive and they're multi-directional. They're dynamic, co-created. People speak as equals, and all people have a right to be truly listened to. They underline the importance of real two-way dialogue, so exchanges of views, but in an open way. They're engaged in with positive intention. So you're not going in there just because you're going in for a fight. You're going in because you actually respect and trust your colleagues. You know that there might be differences. There's often healthy conflict in teams. But the positive intention is to have a purpose with the conversation. That people can feel that it's open and safe sharing of diverse views, etc. And that the openness and honesty and directness then depend on the manager's authenticity. So those of you who are project managers have a responsibility here. If you encourage your team to be open, honest, and direct in expressing what's going on, and then they find out that you're going behind their back and using that against them, I think you've just shut the door on future quality conversations with that group of people. So the manager's authenticity, that they walk their talk, is quite critical here. It's not just about mental connection, the cognitive, intellectual stuff. People connect emotionally, and we have to recognize this. And this is where we get into things like emotional intelligence and empathy, which are very, very important when it comes to that relationship side of the equation. This one, managers spend more time asking and answering questions than telling people. as certain managers, and every meeting is about them getting up on their soapbox, and people just sit there going, oh, here we go again. And the sense that the conversation is going somewhere. So there's what we call intentionality in the conversation. Now, the two core foundations which underpin the ability to have these conversations, the first one won't surprise you. It's called relationships. But the second one you may or may not have heard of. It's called psychological safety. And the most prolific researcher in this area is a lady called Amy Edmondson from Harvard Business School. And it may or may not surprise you to learn that because of a lack of psychological safety, and this is what we just tested, by the way, these are 7 questions from her research that we just did on Mentimeter. So as a result of lack of psychological safety, patients have died in hospitals. This is where she started her research. She was assigned to do some research in a hospital, and she began to look at the relationship between like consultant doctors and nurses and that, and how nurses were afraid to speak up, and they often knew that something was going to go wrong. Plane crashes where the co-pilot dare not contradict the captain of the plane. The Challenger space shuttle, we know that some engineers felt that there was a risk that something would happen with the whatever they call those rings that they had. Nokia, their engineers knew that the Symbian technology was not really going to make it in the smartphone market, but were afraid to tell the senior executives because they didn't want to hear. And we know nobody knows what a Nokia phone is today. I think it's a rare breed. We all used to have those nice silver ones that we were all proud of them, and they got wiped out. Uber, where a culture of not being able to speak up against sexual harassment is one of the more recent things. So a lack of psychological safety produces silence. So no conversation and a fear of speaking up and speaking out in organizations. So one of the things I'll encourage you to do is to check in. We'll share those mentees afterwards, but check in with those factors in your organization, because they will contribute to whether somebody feels comfortable enough to express themselves. Now, there's 2 main dimensions to psychological safety. The first one is the individual dimension. So this is described as an employee's sense of being able to show and employ oneself without fear of negative consequences to self-image, status, or career. I was at a talk in Brussels a few years back. It was a kind of informal gathering. I think it was the British Chamber or something was doing it on diversity and inclusion at work. And we took part in a sort of standing up exchange of views. And there was about 30 people involved in this moderated thing. And I was listening very carefully. And at a certain point, a lady spoke up and she said, "What about the fact that you cannot be yourself at work?" It struck me at the time that with all the talk about diversity and diversity policy and having a diversity manager, that actually if everybody brought themselves to work, obviously within some decorum and respect for certain rules, there'd be a lot of diversity in the workplace. But it was kind of sad to hear that people were worried about being able to be themselves at work. So they were putting on a sort of image every day to go to work. So this is the individual sense of psychological safety. And at a team level, it's a belief that the shared environment is safe for interpersonal risk-taking, which includes being able to learn from mistakes and to suggest new ideas. Now, the word risk is quite important here from the point of view of the brain. I can't actually look inside your brains and understand you from that, but I do study. I spent a lot of time studying it and did some qualifications in it. Once we have a high perception of risk, our brain is always calculating risk and return. It's the most primitive, almost instinct in our brain is to look out for threats in our environment. However, if you're on constant alert and you think that taking any risk within your team is going to be counterproductive, well, you're not going to be very creative. You're not going to offer new ideas, and you're likely to actually experience stress. You're going to become less rational and even more emotional. So people are likely to flip a lot and behave out of character when they believe that the environment is not safe. So these are just a few of the factors. Now, there's a very nice little model I want to quickly show you, and then I'm going on to my last part of my So this model comes from a guy called Dr. Dan Radecki, and those of you who were at my talk last year will probably remember I mentioned a model called the SCARF model, which I displayed a scarf. Well, the guy who created that was David Rock, and Dan Radecki worked with Rock in the Neuroleadership Institute for quite some time. And this model it brings us back to the brain again. You see the brain here? And what I'm just going to walk through the 6 parts, but these are factors that will have an impact on whether you can have quality conversations in the workplace. So the first one is security. This is all about our need for predictability, and it involves factors like consistency and commitment of others and your manager, and certainty and minimal change. So this is what goes into his security. Autonomy is about our need to feel we have control over our environment and our choices. And we don't always have a lot of control over the environment. We certainly want to feel that we can choose how to do what we do. So micromanagers beware. People actually like to be able to get on and do things and be trusted to do things the way that they believe they can. Fairness, huge issue in organizations. As a matter of fact, children learn the art of fairness very, very young. The research shows as young as 2 years old, they learn to share, they learn to take care of each other, surprisingly. Fairness manifests itself. Here's the classic, high performers get penalized in organizations. Why? Because they're high performers, so they get all the extra work. And that's also a function of a manager not being able to have the conversation with the low performer, right? And eventually high performers, they look elsewhere because they're high performers. They know they can do better. Esteem. This is all about how we see ourselves, how we compare ourselves to others, and how we perceive others see us. So anything that affects that is going to threaten our sense of psychological safety in an organization or a team. Trust, well, we know all about the trust, but this is really based on how we evolved as humans to form tribes, and the tribe was based on the idea that we could all rely on each other. And then the last factor is you, and this is all about your biases, your own personality, all those factors you bring, how you're influenced, your own context, what's your past like, what's going on for you now, what's your plans for the future. This is a very nice little model, and you can look up Dan Radecki's work. I think he's done TED Talks and stuff like this, but it's a very useful model to have in mind when you're thinking about the context in which you're having conversations. So, and to just finalize this section on the mindset, I'd like to quote a friend of mine, a man I've learned a lot from over the years. He's a genuinely nice guy, Robert Dilts. Anybody who's come across the world of neurolinguistic programming, NLP, will have heard of Robert. He's written, I think, about 30 books in the topic. But Robert will always, he championed the idea of a manager or a leader as a sponsor. And sponsorship, he said, is about recognizing other human beings, even if you don't agree with them. And it goes like, this is a quote from one of his books: "You exist, I see you, you are valuable. You're important or special or unique. You are welcome, you belong here, and you have something to contribute." I'd like to leave that sink into to all of you as a sort of conclusion to the mindset part. And then I want to move on to the next piece, and that is the skills. Yeah, I see, Brian. We need to have skills. I've got a couple more slides now. So the third final building block are the skills we get. We get here by passing through awareness and the mindset, but we need skills. So a few years back, I was asked to teach a course at the EU called 4 Key Conversations, and I always felt there were 2 missing. So I want to take you through what I call the 6 key conversations now. So the first one is the social one. This one was missing, but this is the social one, the human touch. Whether starting a project or welcoming a new team member, it's surprising how we forget to have the sort of get to know you conversation. It doesn't mean bearing your soul, but it does mean connecting with the human being and the person on the other end. Setting expectations. So this is the baseline conversation. It has 3 elements to it. It's saying, this is what I expect of you, but that's not enough. It's about being able to say, This is how I'm going to measure whether you meet the expectation, and this is why it matters. This is the difference it makes, because that helps the person create a sense of motivation, either for themselves, or at least they can connect to the big picture and understand why their role is significant. So as you go along, assessing progress. Now, this doesn't always have to be negative. This can be ongoing feedback to individuals or members of a team. And it needs to be timely, and it needs to be done regularly. Developing people. So this is where you're setting stretch for your, this is having that conversation about, are you ready for a little bit of a stretch? You know, you've done a good job so far. I was thinking of asking you to take on some extra responsibilities or whatever. It'll be good for your learning, and I'll give you the space to do it through the autonomy. And then one that got left out of it's the celebration. It's the ability to acknowledge high performance and success. So it could be that you've passed a milestone on a project, or it could be that you finished a project. And, you know, rather than it just ending, having that ability to have that conversation about how that project worked, what worked well, what you learned from it, where you could go the next time. And then the final conversation is the one that probably you've all been wondering, where's the conflict? Resolving conflict, so addressing issues early to ensure a healthy work environment. Now, when you think of it, it makes perfect sense that if you do the first 5 quite well, you may be able to minimize number 6. So why would I invest in the first 5? Because most of us aren't that comfortable with the last one. It always presents a bit of a challenge. So we're going to do one last Menti, and basically you have these 6 conversations, and I would like you to share which one do you find the most difficult, and which do you find most challenging, and which do you find the least. So the one you find the most challenging goes to number 1, and the one you find least challenging goes to number 6. So once again, I will open the Menti. Brian, can you confirm that we can see the Menti now? We should be able to see it. And that should mean I can go to the next one. Okay, so I need to open this. Open the voting. Is the voting open now? Just, yeah, I think it is.
Yes, it is.
Okay, so if you can do the same thing again to get a sense of, number 1 will be the conversation you find the most challenging. So put the most challenging one at the top and the least challenging one at the bottom, and then the ones in between. Okay, thanks everyone. I see we're at 21. The last couple of people want to do it now, and then I'm going to go off. Okay, so now we see the results. Okay, very good. Thanks everybody for taking part. I'm going to close it now because I've got a couple of slides I need to get through and Brian's going to be calling time on me. So there's quite one or two important things. So thanks for this. Once again, we share the results afterwards. I need to come out of this now, back into my favorite, presentation again, should see keynote. Okay. So what are the skills you need? So Craig Webber has developed a very nice model here. And it's based on the idea that in many conversations, you have either people who want to win at all costs, they have to be right, and they always want the last word, or you get people who will sit there and they try to keep the peace and minimize and say very little because they don't want to upset the, up the apple cart. So one of the things is to think quickly, which one of these do you sometimes experience either yourself or with colleagues? Because Craig's idea is very simple, actually, and that is that there is a point where you get the balance right where you can achieve what he calls the sweet spot. And so there are two basic dimensions to how you deal with this, and these are going to make perfect sense to you, and I'll give you a couple of examples and then I'll wrap. So the first one is candor. It's your ability to be frank and clear and upfront and to the point. And it's quite simple. Craig has done a lot of work in this and research. I was talking to him the other day. Basically, state your position clearly on something, whatever it is. I'll give you an example in a minute. And then explain to people the thinking underneath it so they know where you're coming from, right? And on the other side of the equation, curiosity. So test your perspective and inquire into the perspective of others. So candor and curiosity, state your position and your underlying thinking, check with other people about theirs, and particularly if people don't necessarily share your thinking, you can inquire. And I'll give you an example on this now. So let's take the second one here, state your position clearly. Do you think we might consider doing some things to make our meetings more effective? The clear position is an agenda would dramatically improve our weekly meetings. Because here's what I think, and here's why I think it. Because it would mean we could stay on track or whatever. Yeah, you'll get the slides so you can go through these examples later. Test your view. Ask people, do you see it differently? Or what's your take on this? What's your take on how we could make our meetings better? Yeah. And to then show that you're open to them having a different view, inquire about their view. So what does this look like from your marketing, finance, engineering perspective? It's a great question you'll come across as a project manager, where you think there's resistance, but you want to understand what's going on in their mind. Can you provide some examples that illustrate your position? So this is a very simple concept. When people are minimizing, there's low candor. When people are focused on winning, they're not open to any curiosity. And if you can state clearly your position and your underlying thinking, and you can test and inquire, you can achieve the sweet spot. It looks simple and it's quite challenging to do, but it's a very, very effective model. And we can measure these things. That's the great thing. We're working with Craig at the moment on how to measure these, and we're using this Harrison tool. And this is all about where you have influence in your work. So you have influence on either interpersonal achievement or authority. And project managers like this because it also goes across how you get things started, how we motivate, how we implement, and how we innovate. And the great thing is you can see your strengths, you can see your blind spots, and a team can do that as well. So here you see this ability to have candor, not so many people up there, some people very balanced up here. The team leader is down here. That's going to be a recipe for problems in that team because you can imagine the quality of conversations that person is leading. When you use the skills, well, if you're going for a drink with your mate, you're probably not going to say, I think we go for a drink and here's my underlying reasoning for that. What would you think, etc. Unless, of course, you want to go to a pub and he or she wants to go to a wine bar. But the two questions are, how difficult is the issue you're addressing and how important it is? Because you're going to need a very high level of what Craig calls conversational capacity to work up here. And that was the top one, dealing with the conflictual stuff. Yeah. So, and there's one more thing. The most common skill, that is most important skill almost to crown them all, and the one that is most lacking in my experience in our society, is the ability to listen. And on that note, I'd like to thank you all for listening. And if you're interested, please call me for a chat. My numbers and all are down here. I produce, Brian is, I hope he's still a fan of my weekly tips and my posts. You can get that through the website. I'll send you a copy of the slides. If you send me an email, I'll send you a PDF. And I've got a new podcast coming up. And one of the first people I'm going to be interviewing is Craig Webber, the guy that I referred to on his model. So if you want to hear Craig talking about that, get in contact with me and I'll notify you when the podcast is ready at the end of the month. I'd like to leave you the last quote from Chris Argyris, who is a great leading thinker on mindsets and learning. Learning is not simply having a new insight or a new idea. Learning occurs when we take effective action, when we detect and correct error. How do you know something? When you can reproduce what it is you claim to know. Thank you. We've probably run out,
Gerry.
Brian. I'm sorry about that.
We're running tight, and I know the next session is going to be a fun one, but we do have one question posted, which we can try and address. I wonder if making people feel safe and using empathy doesn't make you perceived as weak or soft, especially as a woman. That's obviously not my question.
Yes, that would then, the answer to that would be you're applying a stereotype to yourself. That would be the first thing I would say, that it might not be a useful belief to have. Have you ever known a situation where being nice to somebody else has helped achieve a result? That's the question I would ask back. You have to also be prepared to be tough with people. It's called tough love. So as a parent, any of you, or those of you who are parents, or even those of you who ever were a child, will remember that sometimes, you know, you kind of had to toe the line, or sometimes you have to lay the rules down because that's good for the child, but it doesn't mean you're a nasty person. So it's this ability to balance the two out that counts. And the brain doesn't do both of them very well at the same time. I don't know if that helps answer the question. But you can get in contact with me, send me an email, and we can arrange a chat about it if you want to talk it through, because it's quite an important thing to be able to feel comfortable to be, you know, nice to people. And
Super. Thanks, Gerry. We've got no more time for any more questions, but as Gerry says, you can get in touch. These details are on pmfair.org. Seeing your mic there now, I feel like I'm on the radio or something. Like
yeah, my apologies that it ran a wee bit. The thing I couldn't rehearse was the Menti, you see. I couldn't rehearse how long that takes. So,
perfectly fine. One thing left for us to do, that's the winner. I'm sure everybody stayed because of the quality of the presentation and not to get a free chapter membership. But Christina, you're still there. Come off mute and say hi. You're our lucky winner this time. Congratulations, Christina.
Thank you.
You're welcome. We'll drop you the details via email.
Okay, perfect. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thanks, Gerry. Thanks, everyone.
okay. See you maybe in the
Enjoy
next presentation. I'm heading over there now myself.
Yep, me too.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
See you.